Our big story today, Jerry, is short pants.
Wow, let's do it.
We got a little short pants action. The preseason All-Big Ten team for hoops is out. This is a media poll. It includes 3 unanimous picks. They are all big men. Trace Jackson-Davis of Indiana, the preseason player of the year, joined by Michigan's Hunter Dickinson, Purdue's Zach Edey. The rest of the team includes transfer Terrence Shannon of Illinois, Iowa's Chris Murray, Malik Hall of Michigan State, Minnesota's Jamison Battle, Penn State's Jalen Pickett, Cliff Amori of Rutgers, and 2 Badgers, Chucky Hepburn and Tyler Wall. Big Ten Media Days next Tuesday and Wednesday in Minneapolis. You can catch it here live on the Big Ten Network. As for football, Nebraska and Rutgers, that game Jerry was talking about tomorrow night over on FS1. 3 games on the Big Ten Network on Saturday. Purdue and Maryland, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Iowa, Illinois. It's a good lineup. For us, 4th-ranked Michigan will visit Indiana, while Ohio State heads to Michigan State. Let's start with the top 2 teams in the rankings here. And obviously, Michigan State is the highest-ranked Big Ten team. Or Ohio State, taking on Michigan State. Right. This is a matchup, Jerry, that a year ago was 2 top 7 teams going head-to-head. It's crazy what a difference a year makes. And obviously, a lot of that is due to what's happened with Michigan State. Again, Ohio State's still there as the number 3 team in the country. What do you make of kind of where Michigan State is right now?
Yeah, I think it's as much what's happened at Ohio State as at Michigan State, okay? So Ryan Day, they're 11-2, Rose Bowl champions, and he says it's not a successful year. So that's his bar, right? So he fixes the defense with Jim Knowles. He fixes the offensive line with Justin Fry. 2 coaching changes that he made that he feels really good about. But Michigan State was 11-2 as well. So and it was a huge success, right? I mean, Mel gets a new contract. The program is rock solid. And yet now you look at it, Michigan State's 2-3, and obviously Ohio State's undefeated. So I think it speaks as much about Ohio State, how they have separated themselves from the rest of the league, along with Michigan, which we're going to talk about. But Ohio State, they just are very hard to catch for anybody in the conference, including Michigan, although Michigan obviously caught them last year. On the field, X's and O-wise, this is what Ryan Day's been doing. I expect it'll stay the same in East Lansing. He is trying to be as explosive as possible early in the game, meaning he wants to throw the ball downfield, and if he can get a couple touchdown lead, then he's going to bring it back a little bit, and he's going to wind up being half run and half pass. So that's been his recent method to madness. It fits perfectly against Michigan State, right?
Does,
I mean,
yeah.
you couldn't draw it up any better than to attack a Michigan State secondary. So that's how I see it. You know, Michigan State's going to have to play keep away. You know, they've been struggling running the ball. They're struggling throwing the pass. I mean, this looks like it's going to be a really tough one for Michigan State.
Right. I mean, that's the issue. You think a year ago where they lost the game 56-7. So the game plan got thrown out the window pretty quickly. But if you were Michigan State a year ago, you could at least say to yourself going into this game, hey, we need to control it with Kenneth Walker. Ohio State was not great defensively, as we know, a year ago. Really a different story this year. As you say, they've rushed for 180 yards total during this 3-game losing streak Michigan State has. So they can't control the line of scrimmage in any way. It just feels like both sides of the ball. I mean, I know a lot of the emphasis is going to the defense because the defense was so bad last year, but it really feels like both sides of the ball, they're just not where they want to be.
And for people to undervalue Kenneth Walker's value to the team last year is incredible. I mean, we kept talking about him being a Heisman Trophy winner, and then he leaves, and we say, well, yeah, he was good, but he didn't really – he wasn't the reason they were winning. Well, he was a lot of the reason they were winning, just like any other Heisman Trophy candidate. C.J. Stroud is a Heisman Trophy candidate. If he leaves Ohio State, you know, they're going to miss him until they replace him. And so I think people are unrealistic when they say that Kenneth Walker isn't part of the reason, a major reason why Michigan State is in this position right now.
No doubt. Look, I just think that part of that is the mentality of how people look at running backs. You look at running backs different than you look at quarterbacks, rightly or wrongly, maybe partly because of how the NFL values them or doesn't value them, right? And so I think there is this notion that a replacement value running back, you know, kind of a replacement level running back is not that far below a superstar if kind of you have everything else in place. And Jarek Broussard was a Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year, and Jalen Berger we knew was a highly touted recruit. And so the thought was, okay, maybe they fall off a little bit. Yeah, Kenneth Walker was fabulous, but it's different than losing a superstar quarterback. Now, again, that's proven to be wrong, but I think that's the rationale.
Well, on paper, you might be able to say Broussard and Berger don't fall off as much. You watch them on tape. Those two guys are average compared to Kenneth Walker. I mean, they're good players. You have to be a good player to be in the Big Ten and all that. I don't mean to be negative about any young person playing the game. But they're not close to Kenneth Walker. And so even though Broussard was the player of the year, you watch him on tape and he doesn't jump out at you that he could be the best offensive player in the Pac-12, which I guess is the honor that you refer to. Their offensive line is pretty much the same. And I said this during the bus tour, most offensive lines in this conference are all about the same. And then there's 2 or 3 that separate themselves. Historically, Wisconsin has separated themselves. I think Ohio State will separate themselves. Joe Moore Award to Michigan, Michigan last year. But most of the offensive lines are all the same. I think Michigan State's about the same offensive line. Now, they were more explosive on the flank last year. That's for sure. They threw the ball vertically, and they could do that. So I would say that it's Walker and being explosive on the perimeter.
Right, and part of that, Jaden Reed's been a little banged up. You lost Jalen Naylor. So, again, these things just kind of have a way. A lot of little things end up adding up to some really big things. Ohio State did not throw the ball great against Rutgers. It was not one of C.J. Stroud's better games. Do you feel like I'm not suggesting that C.J. Stroud is in the midst of a crisis of confidence coming off that game, but is it important to kind of reestablish that, do you think, early on for Ohio State along the lines of what you're saying, particularly given the challenges that Michigan State secondary has?
Yeah, I do think it's important, and I think Ryan Day, former quarterback himself, I think he'll do that for CJ. And again, I think this is a Michigan State secondary that they could do that. There's a couple things that CJ's doing. There's one play that we're gonna look at on Tailgate and Urban Analysis where CJ is in the pocket, Rever, and there is somebody right in his face. And we review that play and talk about his toughness. So he didn't have a great game statistically, but he has really grown as a quarterback. A lot of young quarterbacks in that situation probably would have tried to get out of the pocket, but he stayed right in there and threw the ball. So there's things he's doing better than he's ever done, but his stats weren't quite as good as they've been. And it's a hard bar to reach, right? I mean, he has to feel some pressure to be the best player in the field every game. That's hard to live with week in and week out.
They have certainly been a big play offense with him at the helm. 21 plays of 30 yards or longer. That is the most of any team in the nation. Michigan going to Indiana. Second straight road game for them after handling the trip to Iowa certainly pretty well in terms of the final score and in terms of the degree to which they were threatened. As you watch them offensively, there's been so much talk about J.J. McCarthy and him winning the job from Cade McNamara. What do you see as you watch him on tape?
Okay, so let's hold Michigan to the same standard we hold Ohio State, right? We expect more from Michigan. They're a playoff team. They've got a lot of the players back. They missed the 2 edge rushes, of course, so their offense. So I've been saying this for a week or two, that the first year that Josh Gattis was at Michigan, they took the spread and they integrated with what Jim Harbaugh did in the I formation, those type of principles. Then the second year, they were mostly spread, not much of Jim's principles of the I formation. Now they're back to that integration. So they're playing in a little bit of a tighter formation, in my opinion, a little bit more easier to defend. JJ has made some real progress. He was struggling with the out route. I think he's got that taken. He looks like he's much better at that. He's back running the option. He ran about 3 options last week, and he intentionally ran out of bounds because that's what the coaches want him to do. So they're trying to keep the option in, but they don't want him, dipping down trying to break a tackle. So he's still a threat. He needs to get a little bit more air over the ball. He had 2 receivers open that would have both been touchdowns. Yeah. Typical of a very young quarterback, when he sits in the pocket, and he starts to feel a collapse, he's trying to make a play, so he might throw it into coverage. He has done that. Probably the worst thing that he did is he was in the grasp of a defender and just threw the ball up in the air, but it didn't hurt him. And so there's some things he's really improved on. He just has to keep doing what he's doing. He is really, really talented, and he's going to be really good. But there's no mistaking as you watch the tape that he is a young quarterback, because a veteran quarterback in the grasp holds the ball. A veteran quarterback who's under pressure and everybody's covered throws an incompletion. There's nothing wrong with an incompletion. Right. So those type of things. But he's so competitive. his expectations of him are so high that he's got to learn to live with, let's play another down. Let's throw it away and play another down. So that's how I see it. I am concerned that I'm concerned about within the scheme and with JJ being young, they've got to grow something to be a championship team. And they grew last year to a championship team. So the same thing can happen this year.
Indiana has struggled a lot defensively this year. What's the formula for them to try to stay in this game?
Well, I'm afraid the formula is not at their disposal unless they make a change, because if their defense is struggling, the last thing they want to do is go fast and go 3 and out. I would suggest to you a crazy idea that line up in the same formation and don't snap the ball until there's 10 seconds left. I would do just the opposite. I would use the same formation and play keep away as opposed to the same formation and going really fast. So they're not playing complementary football right now. I mean, that's the biggest problem. They're 3 and out, and the defense isn't really doing well. There's no worse combination than that.
Right. Obviously, this is kind of the philosophy of Walt Bell, and this is what Tom wanted, right? Otherwise, I mean, you know what you're getting with Walt Bell. When you're in a situation like that, where you're in a game where it feels like you're overmatched, what's the message you send if you go kind of counter to what you've been doing all year? Is that, hey, we're just trying to win the game, and it doesn't mean we don't believe in this system. We just may not think it's the best system for today. Like, how hard is that to sell kids on?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's not hard for Jeff Brom, okay? He ran for more yards than Minnesota did. He threw for less yards than Minnesota did, and he won the time of possession.
Right.
So in Jeff Brom's mind, and some coaches' mind, I'll throw the whole thing out. I'll do whatever I have to do to win.
Right.
And you explain it to the team. When a coach is in a staff meeting and he's convinced he's got the answer to beat Michigan, then he can convince his players that they have a chance if we implement. And I'm guessing Jeff Brom said we're going to run for more yards. And he may not have verbalized it exactly that way, but he lined up in the I formation on downs to throw the ball. Why? Because the protection's better in the I formation than it is in the spread.
Right.
But you're not all that used to defending the play action pass. I know I got off on a tangent, but that's the answer to the questions.
Yeah.
And like I said, I could stay in that same formation, and instead of going really fast, I go really slow.
And that feels like the solution, right? I mean, that feels like the way to keep yourself in the game. And to your point, I don't think it's hard to sell people on that. I don't think it's hard to sell people on, hey, we believe in what we're doing, and this is the best formula for us to beat whomever down the line, but it may not be the best formula against a top 5 team.
And that's the anatomy of an upset, right? I mean, if you're going to upset a team, you don't just say, okay, we're going to run the same plays we ran last week. We had the same players as the opponent did. It was a matchup game, and we're going to run the same plays against the 3rd-ranked or 4th-ranked team in the country.
Remember, you did beat them 2 years ago. It's the only time they've beaten Michigan in the last 26 meetings between those two. Really interesting games there. I think we have a fabulous lineup on Saturday. Every single one of them is compelling. I love that Purdue-Maryland matchup. What stands out to you about those two teams?
Well, first of all, Purdue, and as we know, when you're in the West, your crossovers are also very important. So they've already played Penn State. They lost to Penn State. Now they play Maryland. And their last crossover is Indiana. I don't really consider Indiana a crossover. First of all, it's permanent, and it's a rival, right? I mean, it's an intense rivalry. So to call it a crossover, I think, kind of almost diminishes it. But it lays out for what Purdue is faced with in the West. Plus, they've already beat Minnesota. So that's head-to-head, right? So the tiebreaker's in their favor. So that's what Purdue has at stake before we get into the X's and the O's. Maryland, 4-1. Coming out of this one, 5-1, playing Indiana and Northwestern next 2. I mean, they've got a chance really to have probably a season that none of us thought they could have. Okay, X and O wise, I keep talking about Maryland's defense has improved, and it has. They've made steady progress, and they've been good. The issue is, and I've already mentioned this, when you're going against Jeff Brom, you don't know what you're going to get. As Minnesota discovered, run game, clock, we talked about that in the last block. So what Brian Williams and the Maryland defense has to be careful of is there's going to be something new coming at them. This will be maybe the first time they're really going to be tested with adjustments. Jeff Brom's background is the NFL. He played quarterback at a bunch of different places, and he said he took something from all those different places. And so his structure offensively isn't as narrow as a lot of people's. He's more than happy to run a play that he hasn't run since the opener against Penn State. Not a lot of coaches will do that. So I see this as a challenge to the Maryland defensive staff if Jeff can move the pieces around in a way that maybe he hasn't shown all that much. Now, obviously, he carries a lot of the same plays, but it's those change-up plays that Jeff Brom always gets you.
And the ability to run the ball is a game changer for them. And I mean, that literally has evolved during the course of the year, right? I mean, they would have won the Penn State game had they been able to run out the clock, or had they even really made an attempt to run out the clock against the Nittany Lions, and just weren't able to do it. What about on the other side? This Purdue defense has been playing pretty well. We know how high-powered Maryland's attack is. What do you see there?
Yeah, the matchup that comes to mind is when they matched up against Syracuse. In that last drive that Purdue lost that game, there were, I think 3 penalties, if I remember right.
Syracuse completed 1 pass.
Right. So they're going to be in that position again. So I think Ron English has got to make sure his back end, he not only coordinates the defense, he coaches the back end. He's got to make sure that they play clean in the back end because, as we know, Maryland's got some really good receivers. Leah has really improved. When I was talking about JJ, I was thinking about Leah because earlier in the season, Leah, every time there was pressure, he was gone. Last couple games when Leah's under pressure, he has stayed right in there. So it's a lot of growth. So I would say, obviously you want to get a pass rusher if you're Purdue, but even more important, you have to play clean in the back. You do not want to give them automatic first downs.
It's impressive how well Maryland has run the ball, too. I think when we were at camp, we weren't really 100% sure.
Locks was, though. He was bragging on him.
He was, yeah. No, Hemby's been really good. Really, both of those, I mean, they're freshman backs, right? I mean, redshirt freshmen, still freshman backs, and have really been good. So hats off to that group at Maryland. So that should be a really fascinating game. What about Nebraska and Rutgers tomorrow night, the game that you're going to be watching in solitude and thinking longingly about us? We were talking about Rutgers and the kind of weird dichotomy of them. I mean, I mentioned this in the pregame show last week that in terms of true road games, right, only Georgia and Alabama had won more than Greg Schiano Rutgers in the Power Five during the time that he's been back in Piscataway, yet they have not won a conference home game in 5 years. I mean, it is crazy. If they lose this game, they will tie the longest streak in FBS history. What would it take for them to get a win?
And I'm guessing that's not lost to Greg Schiano because he is one of the coaches, I think, that grabs something to motivate his team, an external thing. He's always going to make something that they haven't done before an issue. And you do that in programs like Indiana and programs like Rutgers. You find something that's never been done. I heard Brett Bielema.
Brett did it.
Brett Bielema constantly says it. There's a lot of firsts at Illinois. Like, we've had a running back that's rushed for 100 yards for 5 straight weeks. Well, that's standard procedure for us. So Greg's
first time winning in Madison in 20 years.
Right. Yep. So Greg's built the same way. So it'll mean something. So I would expect a good crowd. It's a night game. Obviously, Rutgers is another team that always adds something, either personnel-wise or scheme-wise, to their offense. They're pretty static on defense. And so they're going to see the option. They're going to see some change-ups. I think Mickey Joseph has an interesting challenge as well. It's his first away game. So what does that mean? We all get on the plane. Well, every coach is a little different. Some coaches, if you're yucking it up on the team plane, nobody cares. Or, other coaches, if you're yucking it up, it's your fault we lost. I mean, it just depends. So Mickey's going to have to teach them how he wants them to travel and how he wants to coach on the road. And when you're managing a game on the road and it's a close game, which I think we both would agree, we would expect it to be a close game, making decisions on the road, game management, is a little different than making decisions at home on the road. So this is Mickey's been the head coach and he's been around a while, so he's been through this some. But I think most of the issues favor Rutgers over Nebraska, but I wouldn't count Nebraska out.
Another way you're talking about motivating your team. I mean, Rutgers has never beaten Nebraska. They're 0-5 against them all time. And then Nebraska haven't won back-to-back conference games since 2018. So again, if you're looking for kind of that extra motivational angle, I think it's there really for both of these teams.
Yeah, I think Mickey's built that way too. I don't think Scott was. I don't think Scott really cared about any of that external motivation stuff. In fact, he even said, if I got to motivate my locker room, I recruited the wrong guys, which I totally disagree with. But I think Mickey believes he does have to motivate his guys.
Yeah, really interesting game.
Yes.
And the beauty of that game is, and I do not say this at all sarcastically, someone gets a win, right? Someone comes out of that feeling good, and not that different than Nebraska, Indiana last week, which was a good launching pad for the Huskers. Our big stat, taking a look at the exploits of Purdue's Charlie Jones, second in the nation in receptions and TD catches, 47 and 7 respectively. Keep in mind, in 36 career games entering this season at Buffalo and Iowa, Jones had totaled 39 career receptions and 6 TDs, so he has exceeded both of those totals already this year. Charlie Jones, the Big Ten's leading receiver in all of those categories. He is today's big interview. And Charlie, first off, how does that sound? Have you gotten used to this notion of being referred to as the top receiver in the Big Ten?
I don't think so. I mean, it's the reason I came here, so that's awesome, but I don't think I've gotten used to it.
It is pretty amazing to look at what you have accomplished in the context of what you had done prior in your career. Did you always think you had this in you? Like, are you surprised at all by how amazingly well it has gone?
No, I mean, I feel like I always knew that I was able to play in the Big Ten against good competition every week, and that's really why I left and transferred out of Buffalo and went to Iowa, because I felt that way, and then the same when I was leaving Iowa coming here.
Take us back to the Penn State game. I mean, that is the game where you kind of entered the national consciousness. The 12 receptions in that game, you had never had more than 3 in your career. At what point during that game did you kind of realize this is going very well?
In moments like that, you're not really thinking about that. I was just out there doing what I was supposed to be doing. But it definitely was a little bit different, getting that many opportunities, being targeted that many times, and just being able to help out the offense and the team as many times as I was able to.
So while that game is going on, I mean, you're out there on the field, right? And unbeknownst to you, Gus Johnson dubs you Chuck Sizzle, or Chuck Sizzle. Yeah. I think, as we should say, if we're going to go down the Gus path. At what point did you become aware that you were now Chuck Sizzle?
Probably not till the next day. All my friends, and family were texting me saying, Chuck Sizzle and all that, and using the nickname, and it's kind of stuck since then. My teammates are calling me now. So
we were looking just a moment ago at some T-shirts in the campus bookstore there at Purdue. So how does that work now? I mean, was that something that you put into motion? Like, is that an NIL deal that you got with the Chuck Sizzle shirts? Take us through that.
Yeah, so a company reached out. This was a company that I actually had a T-shirt with when I was back in Iowa, and they reached out and said, they'd love to make some new shirts. They've been following me, and they'd love to reach out to the bookstore or anywhere else and see if they could come up with some deal to get them around here. So that's how it really happened.
How are the sales of Chuck Sizzle shirts going?
Honestly, I don't know yet. I think it hasn't been a month yet. I think every month they kind of update me. So we'll see.
Take us back a little bit. So you were from suburban Chicago. You were not heavily recruited at all. I know that the offense that your high school ran was not one that necessarily lent itself to receivers shining through. You ended up going to Buffalo. Take us through your recruitment. Like, where else were you recruited? Did you have other offers, or was it kind of Buffalo or bust?
Yeah, so I mean, it was definitely different when I was coming out of high school. We ran the triple option at Deerfield, and being a receiver, it's kind of tough. But I had a couple MAC schools that came and offered me, but I was waiting to see. I knew that I could play at a Power 5 school, and I was just waiting, and no one was looking. So the longer I waited, schools were starting to back out, and then it came down to Buffalo and North Dakota State, and I made a decision like the day before signing day to go to Buffalo.
So you went to Buffalo, and you had some impact there in your second year, and then you decided to kind of take a chance on yourself, right, and transfer to Iowa.
Yep.
You had to go as a walk-on. Why do you think you were still so undervalued at that point?
You know, I don't know. I was coming off surgery on my shoulder. You know, I was playing in all the games, but not starting in all of them. You know, I wasn't doing too much on the field. But like I said before, you know, I believed in myself. I knew that I could play at the highest level, and you know, I emailed as many schools as I could think of when I was leaving, and still no one offered. So I knew that Iowa was a place where walk-ons traditionally get that opportunity to come in and play and get good snaps. So that's really why I ended up going there.
What was it like to get that recognition at Iowa last year with the Big Ten Return Specialist of the Year? What did that mean to you after kind of everything that you had been through trying to prove to the world what you had long believed, that you could play?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty awesome. My first year playing, I was only returning punts, and it's kind of what got my foot in the door to expand and show more of what I'm able to do. And then last year, you know, winning that award, it was pretty awesome. I mean, that was my goal going into the season. It was something I believed for a long time that I was capable of doing, and it was pretty cool feeling to actually get it.
You originally announced that you were going back to Iowa for another year, and then later in the process you decided to enter the portal. What made you decide to move?
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason I ended up coming back for a sixth year was to prove that I'm a receiver as well as a returner. You know, and I wanted to show what I'm capable of doing in that sense of the game. And you know, I went through spring ball and just made the decision. You know, I want to put myself in the best position possible to showcase those abilities, and I knew Purdue was a no-brainer when it came to that.
You and Aiden O'Connell played at neighboring high schools. Give us a sense of that relationship. I know that you guys had a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah, you know, we played Little League football. We played Little League baseball together. You know, and then we went to separate high schools. But you know, we were always, you know, it was always, you know, what if we played at high school together? What if? But you know, we went our separate paths again in college. Stayed in touch every once in a while. Came home for breaks and would throw every once in a while. So, you know, and when he was playing well, you know, I'd reach out and vice versa. So we stayed in touch a little bit.
What role did he play in getting you to go to Purdue?
Yeah, I mean, a pretty big role. You know, the combination between the offense that Purdue has, and then you add in a guy like Aiden O'Connell, who's, you know, everything a receiver's looking for. A great leader, obviously a great player, great guy, and someone that I knew. So when you're making a move like that with only a year left, it definitely helps to know someone in that position.
I've heard Jeff Brom talk about taking you in the portal, and he basically said we had one spot left and we had some injuries at wide receiver, and his name came up, and I was kind of like, okay, what the heck? I mean, it doesn't seem like he really pursued you all that actively. Give us a sense of what those conversations were like.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty brief. You know, once I went into the portal, me and Aiden were talking, and then you know, pretty soon I was talking to Coach Brom, and you know, it wasn't anything serious. wasn't conversations that were too long. But you know, I went through and I made sure I was doing my homework, and I'm sure they were doing the same on me.
Well, it's been quite a journey. It's really been fun to watch you emerge here, one of those great stories in the Big Ten. I know you're really close with your family. How has your family kind of helped you through this 6-year odyssey, or probably even longer, going back to high school, of going from a young man who believes in himself, who no one else believes in, to finally emerging onto this big stage?
Yeah, you know, they've been a huge part of it. Wouldn't be where I'm at without them. It was a tough decision when I was leaving Buffalo to walk on. You know, that directly affects my family. But you know, everyone was super supportive. You know, whatever had to be done to make it work, you know, they did it. And before everything, they were always supportive. They always knew that they had the same beliefs as I did, and you know, just continuously motivated me. Especially, you know, the year where I was ineligible transferring. You know, when just things weren't going super well, they always had my back, and kind of motivated me through this whole process.
I know that as a middle schooler, you watched your older brother, Matt, fight cancer. How did that impact you and shape you?
Yeah, it's tough. You know, your older brother, seeing him go through something like that, and being at a young age, not really knowing how you could help or what you could do. But I think he's someone I've always looked up to. Just watching him handle something like that, and it was never about him. He never used it as an excuse. You know, wouldn't use it as an excuse in school. Always did his work throughout that whole time when he was in high school, dealing with that, and it just taught me a lot of life lessons. You know, things that are much bigger than football. Just really how to deal with adversity and deal with things as a man and just in the right way.
What has it meant to him to see your success?
I'm sure it's meant a lot. I mean, he's been super supportive throughout this whole process, and you know, we're really close. And like I said, he's always wishing the best on everyone else, and I know he's super excited and super happy for me, seeing me do what I'm doing right now.
Well, it's amazing to hear that he has come through this. I want to leave you with this, a little more mundane than what we were just discussing, but give us the scouting report on Maryland. What can we expect coming up here this weekend?
Yeah, they're a tough team. They got a good defense, you know, but we've had a good week of practice, and we're ready to go out there. It's going to be a 60-minute game, and we're ready to go out there and give everything we got to the last second.
Well, Charlie Jones, Chuck Sizzle, congratulations on all of your success so far this year. It really has been a cool story, a ton of fun to watch you, and look forward to seeing you here on the Big Ten Network on Saturday.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Tomorrow, a star-studded volleyball doubleheader begins with Emily Londot and the Buckeyes against Allie Holland and the Nittany Lions. Then it's Taylor Landfair leading the Gophers into a matchup with Jess Merzick and the Wolverines. Coverage begins Friday at 6:30 Eastern, powered by Unleaded 88, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. No fewer than 6 new offensive coordinators in the Big Ten, or I guess 7 if you count the dual coordinators at Michigan. Barry Lunny Jr., Walt Bell, Sharon Moore, Matt Weiss obviously were promoted internally. Kirk Shiraka making his return, Mark Whipple, Bobby Engram, external hires at Nebraska and Wisconsin. Let's touch on a few of the more interesting ones here, Jerry. Brett Bielema brought in Barry Lunny. He had hired him at Arkansas, decided to make a change after 1 year and bring him in Illinois. What has stood out as you've watched his offense?
Well, one thing is that Brett has evolved offensively, right? When Brett was last time we saw Brett at Wisconsin, they were I formation, and I think that's pretty much what they were doing at Arkansas. I don't really remember all that much about it, but he wanted to evolve, but he didn't want to lose the personality of the running game. He didn't want to lose the personality of having a 100-yard rusher every Saturday, because he wanted to build an offense around that. So Barry Lunney gave him that opportunity, and it's obviously worked out very well. What Barry has brought to him is the perimeter pass game and the vertical pass game. And you can't do those type of things from tighter I formation plays. So it's been a perfect fit. It's worked very well, and they'll continue to be tested. And like any new coordinator, they're going to be scouted more, and they'll see more resistance and more change-ups as we go through the season.
It's been pretty interesting how versatile it is, though. They have 2 games where they've rushed for more yards than they've thrown for. They have 3 games where they've thrown for more yards than they've rushed for, so you get a sense that Barry Lunney has an answer for just about anything that's thrown at him. What about Kirk Ciarrocca? And there was so much excitement about this. Obviously, they did not play well last week, but still, this is an offense that's humming far better than it was a year ago.
And the interesting thing about last week, and we've talked about Kirk Ciarrocca a lot and his relationship with Tanner Morgan, which is a lot to do with the rehiring of him. But they were in position to throw the ball more last week against Purdue, and they did throw it. Of course, they threw 3 picks, but Ciarrocca had them in position to win with the pass game if somebody shut down the run game. And I think that's the change from the first time Kirk was at Minnesota. They've worked on the pass game. I think it was Western Illinois. They threw for over 300 yards in the second game of the year. And so you could see this coming, where in a tight game they were going to have to throw it. They did. They just didn't execute it. But again, we've talked about this before. Give PJ a lot of credit for bringing a guy back who left him to go to another conference school.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It's unselfish. It's what's best for the program. And it's hard losing coaches. Trust me, it's hard losing coordinators. And to lose one and then have one come back, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been great. And again, really running exactly the offense that PJ Fleck wants to run. They lead the nation in time of possession. And to your point, I mean, they're 13th in the nation in passing efficiency. So when they need to throw the ball, again, last week had a touchdown go through a receiver's hand, didn't necessarily go great, but they can do it when they have to. How about the other side of the ball, the defensive side? Here you see the new defensive coordinators. Brian Williams, an internal promotion at Maryland, as was Ron English at Purdue. But you see some of the other names there. Jim Knowles is probably the one we were most curious to see in the preseason. You touched on him a bit earlier, but how do you feel like this is working out?
So Jim Knowles' biggest adjustment is how to coach a bunch of draft picks, right? Because he's never really had this kind of talent. Very few coaches ever have an opportunity to coach a team as talented as Ohio State on both sides of the ball. And so he came from Oklahoma State. He was a little different at Oklahoma State. I was really curious to study the tape as we went through if he was going to move away from Oklahoma State. I think he has a little bit. I mean, only Jim could really answer that question. But, and I mentioned this last Saturday, to put in an entire new scheme, you have 15 practice days in the spring. On defense, you very rarely tackle any longer. Then camp, you try to get something done. It's not until 3 or 4 games into the season that you really feel comfortable that the scheme is working and getting better. And I think that's exactly where Jim Knowles is. And, Ryan Day was so confident about this hire.
Yeah.
And now I think we all can see why.
10th in the nation in total defense. They were 59th last year. Different story at Penn State. Manny Diaz takes over a really successful defense. Brent Pry, in fact, gets promoted, gets a head coaching job at Virginia Tech off the strength of that defense. And so a difficult situation, I think, for Manny Diaz, particularly because you look at that front seven, they lost some really good, really productive players. What do you make of what he has done?
The thing that's jumped out at me about Manny is, not necessarily the scheme, not necessarily watching him practice when we were at camp, although he was an excellent practice coach on the field. He wears cleats. He's all fired up.
Yeah, no, he's great. He's got great edge.
But most of the time we talk about offensive play callers, right? Ryan Day, Yursich, whoever you want to talk about. Manny Diaz reminds me more of an offensive coach than a lot of defensive coordinators, and it was the Auburn game where he would bring pressure when they weren't expecting pressure. He would cover them. I really felt like he had Auburn's offense off balance, and so his years and years of experience, in my small view of him, is he's a great defensive play caller. Not that the other guys aren't, not that Jim Knowles isn't, but that just jumped out at me about Manny watching the way he calls plays. He's a little bit more unpredictable, and yet he's not all that multiple. It's like Steve Spurrier calling pass plays. It's not anything special. It's when he calls the play. And that's the way Manny, in my mind, that's the way Manny is.
It does feel like he dictates the game a lot from the defensive side of the ball, which is different than some of the defenses we've seen have a lot of success in the Big Ten, where you've just got to figure, they're so fundamentally strong and you just need to figure out a way to solve them. This is a little bit different, and obviously the results speak for themselves. Forced 11 turnovers in the last 3 games. I mean, they have their opponents way off balance.